Hey, it's Colin from Legalized Mischief Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to get diseased, bruised, unhealthy flesh. This is the result of one of my Patreon supporters in the tutoring tier. In our one-on-one session, he had a bunch of Dark Eldar grotesques and racks to paint and wanted a kind of unhealthy looking skin, but it wasn't going to take forever, a bunch of glazes and all this stuff. So it was a lot of fun sitting down and developing. We actually ended up doing two different types of skin. One is kind of a colder, more sickly looking skin, and one is a more bruised and like really unhealthy looking skin. And nice thing about this is applicable across all kinds of different armies. Chaos especially could be really cool for this. Nurgle or Slaanesh, and any kind of Dark Eldar Coven, any of those kind of really unhealthy people. Even Admech, where there's flesh, they're not taking care of themselves. So this is really applicable across a lot of different armies, and I think it's a lot of fun. So we're gonna play with we're gonna lay down some base coats with the airbrush, and then we're really just gonna start doing some chunky highlights on the skin to kind of give it a little texture, and then we're gonna start just mucking about with different glazes, or not glazes, but different washes and things like that to get just a little more visual interest and a little more color. But it should be a lot of fun, and that's what we like to do. It should be fun, should be effective, efficient. So to start, for the colder skin, so actually for both of them, we're going to be using a Purple Shadow from Vallejo. This comes in the Malefic Flesh set. This is took up the whole screen. Malefic Flesh set. This is a partnership between Vallejo and Nocturna Models. It's kind of a marketing thing, but it's a great set that has just really interesting skin tones, and it has a little booklet in there that kind of goes over some different ways to get a greenish pallid flesh, or a purplish or bluish. I used a lot of these paints when I did like a Baden skin because he's super pasty. So it's a really nice little set to get different tones of skin other than just using flesh tones. So we're going to use a few paints. We're going to use a few paints out of that set, and then a few a couple model color flesh tones and some gray, and then Army Painter and Citadel washes. I'll put a list of the paints that we use in the post, so you can follow along. And I started with just a Zenithal Prime, just simple Zenithal Prime with some airbrush primer to kind of define the musculature. I'm using Chaos Demon Prince torsos because they do have such well-defined musculature, and we're just gonna do the front of the model in both of these tones. So it's not really about how do I paint a Demon Prince, it's about how do I achieve these flesh tones, because you're going to be able to paint any model in these flesh tones using these techniques. So we start with a thin down Purple Shadow, and we're just gonna lightly cover. We want it to be thin, and we want to do a light base coat because we don't want to obliterate the Zenithal Prime that we have. We want those shadows to be nice and dark. It's really going to help accentuate the musculature on the model, as you can see there. That's just the purple shadow and a zenithal, and we've got some really nice shading and some really nice textures starting to show up there. So make sure that the paint is nice and thin as you're applying it, watering it down. I just watered this. I just used water to thin this. In general, I usually just use water, just tap water. I have some, for Scale 75, some of their paints can be a little finicky. So I'll use they have their own kind of acrylic thinner. Same with AK. AK can be a little finicky. So I'll use their thinner at times as well. But in general, I just use water to thin paint and just kind of get used to it. It's what I've always done, so I've never really experimented with the different kind of flow improvers or anything like that. So, to each their own. There's, I'm sure, a lot of merit in using those products, but I've just never really done it. So for the cold flesh, what we're going to do is we're going to do a highlight with Malefic Flesh, and you can see this is kind of a brownish, kind of a cold brown kind of look. So we're going to thin that down as well. And we're just going to do kind of a repeat of the zenithal of the white. And you can look up, there are a lot of tutorials and explanations out there about zenithal priming. It's not generally something I do because by the time I've done, a base coat, 2 or 3 highlights, and it's just kind of gone. So it's not something I do very often, but when you're doing a model that has a lot of flesh like this, like I did it on my Bloodthirster, I think. I did it on Magnus, I think. So when you really want to accentuate that musculature, it's really going to give you those hard shadows, which is what you want. So for the cold side of the model, come on, get my airbrush to cooperate here. We're just going to go and follow the muscles, and we're painting like at an angle. You can see there that we're maintaining those shadows. That's really important when doing any kind of musculature. And I'm gonna airbrush the back just so we can see the difference between just doing the skin and then it's really dark. Hang on. Sorry. There we go. That's better. Now you can see. I'm gonna do the back just to show the difference between working with just the airbrush and then once we start glazing in those washes. So that's really all we want, is just a little nod, just a little kind of base coat on the flesh, and then we're gonna follow it up with pale flesh, also from the Malefic Flesh set. I like this color. This is like a really gray. This is like a really gray flesh color, but it still has a little bit of that kind of flesh tone in it. And this is going to be much lighter than what we've been doing so far. So it's really going to be a nice highlight. And then from there, we're going to go. I totally just dropped paint in my lap, but from there we're going to go in with the brush, and then the rest of it will be brushwork. So this is going to be the last highlight on this one, and then on the next, on the warm skin, we're not even going to do 2 airbrush highlights. We're just going to do one and then start in on the brushwork. So a lot of this is brushwork because we want a lot of texture in these models, in these flesh. We don't want, this isn't, you know, really fine glazing, and this is chunky and choppy and beautiful. So there you can see we have this really kind of sickly, purplish, grayish flesh. The muscles are really well defined. And so we're going to ramp up that look with some controlled washes and some controlled glazes in the shadows and stuff, and really make them look unhealthy. That's the goal. So we'll put that one aside. We'll put the cold flesh aside, and we're gonna grab beige red, also from Model Color, and this is a really nice dark rosy skin tone, which is going to work really well with it's going to work really well with the purple undertones as well. And that would be true even if we were doing healthy flesh. That would be beige red is a great color, and you'll see I'll do plenty of tutorials on doing, you know, skin tones and faces and stuff like that. I know that's always something that's tricky, and it's something that I think I'm fairly good at. So beige red is going to be featured in those because it's just such a great skin tone. But we're going to use it here as the base, and then we're going to bruise it up and sicken it up with the washes. And you're going to be able to see just how easy this is to get a really kind of sickly look. Oops, that might be a little heavy, but that's okay, because we're really going to tone this down a lot. Kind of hit those under muscles there. And so you can see you see the difference between these two. We have a warmer skin tone and we have a colder on the right. The one on the left, you know, isn't all the way gone, I guess. He still has some healthy elements. Hasn't been under the homunculus' knife for too long, but the guy on the right definitely has seen better days. Doesn't get a lot of sunlight. So that's it for the airbrush. We're done with the airbrush. So as you can see, if we were batch painting a bunch of grotesques or a bunch of racks or something, you know, that's going to be, we'd be able to knock that out in no time at all, those base coats. And then moving on to just playing around with washes. So what we're going to do now is get some washes in the palette, or excuse me, what we're going to do first is we're going to get some highlights down. So we want to do the highlighting before we do the washing, because we want everything to kind of be treated the same. So, and I will get a palette cam, I promise, eventually. So put the palette in the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the highlights on the cold flesh first, and then we're going to move on because we have to bruise this flesh before we do highlights. So we're going to do highlights here, and then we'll work in some washes, and then we'll do highlights here and work in some glazes. So for the cold flesh, what we're going to do is we're going to use this malefic flesh, which is the mid-tone. Because if we use the highlight, it's going to be way too bright. So we're going to use that, and then we're going to use white flesh to lighten it up so that it still has that kind of flesh color. And we want this to be thin. We do not want this to be obscuring what's underneath, and you can see it's almost like a glaze. Like, we really want that to be super thin. And what we're going to do is we're going to give kind of the impression of stress muscles underneath, and we're going to do just really quick kind of choppy highlights in horizontal strokes like that. And the reason for that is we want to give some texture to that skin. So you can see there, we're starting to get a little bit of texture. We're starting to get a little bit of flavor in there. Not sure if it's a flavor you'd necessarily want. I do wish these giant chaos stars weren't in the middle of this torso for the sake of this tutorial, but everything else is good. So really well-defined musculature, and I had it lying around, so that's another bonus. Just a little bit on these kind of lat muscles here. I don't know what muscles those are, but now we're going to lighten it up just a little bit more, and we're just mixing in a little bit more of that light flesh, but we're still like, that's too thick. So we're going to take some water from our pot, and we're going to water that down even more. That's better. So we're going to water that down even more because we don't want this to be really bright, but we want it to show up. We want it to influence the model. So always trying to strike that balance. And then a little bit more. But when you water it down that much, it's also going to be more transparent. And so we want those underlying tones to influence this highlight because it's so much lighter than what we've been working on, that we don't want it to just look like white lines on the flesh. So you'll see that once that dries, a lot of that, like the texture will stay, but a lot of that really stark difference will lessen. So want to get a nice chunky, you can see it there, we're getting those nice lines, and we're getting that texture, and that's something that goes to create a more natural effect when we're getting the texture underneath the skin. And that's it for the highlights on that. So, real quick, just run through with those horizontal strokes and knock out some texture on the muscles. If the model, like the racks, have sculpted, like exposed kind of, I don't know if it's muscles or if it's or what. I don't know if even the homunculus knows, but the racks have that exposed flesh. So you could just dry brush that with that mixture and get just a nice quick highlight, and you can see, it's starting to look pretty good. As far as the warmer tone, we're sitting pretty rosy on that. He's looking a little too healthy. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix some beige red with some Vallejo model colored dark gray. And what this is gonna do is this is really gonna desaturate those warm tones, and it's gonna really suck all the light and the life out of the flesh tone. And that's what we want. We want this sickly, kind of grody. Ooh, I almost went too far. Good thing I used a wet palette. So before we do that, we are going to go in with Army Painter Blue Tone and Army Painter Purple Tone, and we're going to bruise this guy up. So first a little Lamian Medium. And what that does is it helps it flow. It makes it a little thinner so it doesn't discolor, because these things are pretty potent right out of the pot. So it's not, we don't want a purple and blue model. We want a bruised model. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix those with Lamian Medium, and we want them to be pretty thin by the time, so you can see there that blue tone is pretty thin, and same with the purple is pretty thin. Right out of the pot, they'd be way too strong. And what we're going to do is we're going to randomly kind of model, like I'm using just a destroyed brush, but it's perfect, because what we're going to do is we're going to, ooh, that might be a little too thin. See, we still want it to show up, but, so it's kind of a fine line. So we're going to take some of that and we're going to mix it in, because you can see there, that didn't really do a whole lot for us. That just kind of fell flat. So we do want to model, there we go, that's much better. So we're getting that blue, pick up some purple, and it's okay for them to mix, but you do want areas where it still looks purple, it still looks blue. You don't want to just obliterate, you don't want it to just be a purplish blue mix mess under there. You do want to maintain, so a little bit extra in the, and maybe get some more blue in there, and some more blue up here. And when you're doing this, you're really trying to do it just randomly, because when that dries, it's going to give you a really nice kind of bruised look to that skin. So we're going to set that aside, and then we're going to come back with our cold flesh, because blue and purple are colder tones, and we're going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to get that blue and that purple working, just to kind of define and reinforce those shadows. In those highlights, and kind of redefine the musculature. So looking pretty good. Excellent. So we're going to pause there, and excuse me, we're going to pause there, and we're going to let that dry, because with the Lamian Medium, it does take a minute to dry. I don't want to just have you sit here and wait for this to dry. I guess I could break out. Yeah, and we'll do it. This is going to be a little loud. I apologize in advance. This is a heat gun. You probably want to use a hair dryer and be safer, because this could just, melt the model. But I'm a seasoned pro with the heat guns, so don't try this at home. But it's going to be loud. Turn down your audio. Ooh, that's hot. Okay. Uh, I'll be doing a thing on the heat gun when I assemble some Forge World. This thing is awesome for shaping, like reshaping resin that comes warped, which never happens in Forge World. But I used to do the boiling water thing. This is amazing. So I'll be doing a little write up about that and how to use that. But for now, it worked really well to just go boop and dry those out, and you can see on that flesh that kind of bruising, and we're getting a really nice kind of bruised flesh look there. And for the colder skin tone, it really just kind of flattened out those highlights and just gave a little bit more interest to the skin. So going back to the highlights. So now that we have these established with the bruised skin, what we're going to do is we're going to go in with our dark gray and beige red mix. Again, very, very thin. That's even a little too thick. Very, very thin on this, because this we really want to maintain that bruising on the model. So that's probably good. And you can see how like not rosy that is. That gray just desaturated all that color. And we're going to come through, a little too watery. If the paint doesn't show up, it's a little too watery. So we'll mix a little more. I think it's too dark too. So we're going to mix a little more beige red in there, maybe a little bit more. Test. That looks pretty good. So, and we're going to do those kind of chunky, striated highlights on that, and a little bit on the abs. This guy's got abs for days. And a little bit on those muscles there, and a little bit of the striations, those chunky highlights up there. And you can see those highlights have dried, but we still have that kind of bruising underneath the flesh there, which just is a really great, it just is a really great look. So then we're going to take a little bit more, we're going to add just a little bit more of that beige red and do a couple little highlights here, a couple little highlights there. Again, those striations. And this is very thin, just working very fast. We want this to be textured. We want this to be chunky. And then we're going to add just a little bit of light flesh to the mixture. We can even actually go steal some of this white flesh from the cold side and just mix that in, because we really just want to lighten this up just a little bit and get those final highlights. And these we want thin, thin, thin. So that's probably good. Maybe a little bit of water. Thin, 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 because these are going to be really stark. This bright, this lightened up mix here. So we don't want to overwhelm all the work that we've done up to this point with really bright highlights, but that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. So keep going, just adding those striations, kind of staying in the same areas of the model. And if those big chaos stars weren't there, we could do a little bit more with the chest, but c'est la vie. I've never really been a huge fan of the Demon Prince model, but the Forge World ones are cool. But this one, I'm just not really a huge fan. So, but it's great for teaching how to paint skin. So you can see now, it looks kind of healthy, but it has this like weird color to it, and that's exactly what we want. That looks like success. So now we have these two torsos where we've done kind of the upfront work, and then now what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're really going to gross these guys out. So a little more Lamian in those, and we're going to use some GW shades to really make these guys look pretty gross. So Druchii Violet, Kazandori Yellow, and then Bloodletter Glaze are going to be what we're going to use from here on out. And this is where we're really going to get that sickly. This is where you're going to go, whoa, these guys are unhealthy. And we're using the Druchii Violet instead of the purple tone because it just has a little bit more punch. It's a little bit more purple. The Kazandori Yellow is great for like jaundice, the kind of jaundiced look. So, and then Bloodletter Red Glaze is just a great product, like in general. I really like how that behaves, and we're going to use that to give some really interesting. You can see like the Druchii Violet is just a little bit more purple, whereas this is a little bit stronger, whereas this is like a little bit just kind of like purple. This has a little bit more warmth to it. So that's going to be really good on the cold flesh side of things, where we want to kind of punch up. It's looking a little washed out, so we kind of want to punch up that color. So we're going to get this, and this is going to be a little bit more controlled. We don't really want to interfere with the highlights too much, but we do want to go back and kind of reassert those shadows. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our finger and just wipe off the top of the muscles where our highest highlights are, so that it doesn't stain the top of the muscles. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go in with that Bloodletter kind of around the neck. And this would be like if you had, if you're painting like Grotesques or Talos or something, and they have or Admech, and they have all those ports in their skin and things like that, where random things have been attached in that wonderfully 40K way. This is where you want to concentrate that red to give that kind of sore look, where the skin is objecting to those implants. And because the rest of the flesh is so cold, when we put that red in there, it really gives it a nice effect. I mean, that is pretty cool. So you can go through and kind of glaze the shadows a little bit. We don't want to turn everything red, obviously, but and it'll depend on the model. It'll depend on which model's in the unit. You can go heavy or light. You can come back and mix in blues or whatever you want to get different effects, so that all these models aren't going to look the same. They're all going to be kind of more individual and more visually interesting. So while that's drying, we're going to come back to the warm side of things here. In this, we're going to be a little bit more aggressive with the washes, because we really want to gross this guy out. So we're going to come in with the yellow and the red and really kind of jaundice this guy out. So so a little bit of that red and a little bit of the purple for more bruising. And this, we are going to go up above the highlights, because we do want we do want a lot of that too, but we're still gonna wipe it off. But we do want his skin to be discolored. We don't want that kind of natural highlight to survive this wash step. We want it to be discolored and looking like a pretty jaundiced individual. Where, you know, it's pretty clear this guy's organs don't function properly. He's in a bad way. Even for 40K, you know, nobody's trading places with this guy. So you can see we've started to get, especially, I might even go back with just a little bit more of that yellow and kind of work it a little bit more to even just really accentuate how unhealthy this guy's going to look at the end. But the fun thing about this is you can mix, you know, we have, you know, the two different purples, the blue, the yellow, the red. So you can go through and you can do all your shade, all your highlight, and then come back, thin up a bunch of these washes and glazes and just go to town. And you just sit there and you're just mashing paint and, you know, wiping it off with your finger, and it's fun and you're having a good time. So, and that should be part of painting too, you know, is that having fun with it and experimenting and getting different. Well, what does this do? Well, what does that do? Generally, I'd stay away from like just straight browns, like Agrag's Earth shade. They're just not that interesting. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bust this bad boy out again, and we're going to dry these up so we can kind of get a final look at these models. And think like if you're getting ready for an event, or I mean like if you're doing, I mean like a bunch of plague bearers done up like this would look super gross and creepy. Obviously grotesques and stuff like that, but even like Rob Bringers and Age of Sigmar, or you know, really just unhealthy Imperial Guard. You know, you're like, spent a little too long at the front. So here we have the results of those two tutorials, or those two tones of flesh. We have the cold and warm, and that was what, 35 minutes from start to finish on two different, I mean, on the chests obviously. So again, if we go back, so I'm going to turn these guys around. If we go back, this is where we started before we started laying in with the brush. And then just how much more visually interesting that is in that short of a period of time. Just using rough highlights and washes can get you some really cool effects. Might have gone a little heavy on the yellow for this guy, but that's fine. You know, on the other guy, maybe you go, you know, a little less, or go a little heavier on the red or blue, or, you know, it doesn't really, just play with it. Just play around with it and have fun. So hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Hope you're painting some really gross models with them. And as always, check out, thank you for your support. Check out the YouTube, Instagram. Hope to see you on the Twitch stream. And if you have any questions, comments, leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much. See you soon.